Cool. So today we're going to talk about one of our recent projects for a brand called Kettle Kids. We'll talk about that in a few minutes about who they are. But we're going to start off by talking a little bit about who we are. We're going to start by also talking through a little bit of the process that we take with our projects generally, but then also trying to frame it specifically of how we took this particular project through from start to finish. So as mentioned, this is the other angle that you can't see. So we're actually sitting in that meeting room at the moment. So we're on the other side of that door. As Chris said, so I'm James and this is Edmund from Times Elliott. I'm really excited to be able to present this project into you, especially showing the amount of backstory and working as they've got to that final point. It's quite rare to get that opportunity. So Chris, thanks very much for having us. We're only a small part of the studio and we've got some really exciting things to show you. So let's introduce ourselves first. So I'm James, I'm the founder of Times Elliott. As you saw on the previous slide, started June 2010, had originally been in the advertising world, as a lot of people within my age bracket seem to be. Old men started in the advertising world and decided that it wasn't for them and moved into graphic design. And we're a studio that focuses predominantly within the branding space, but it tends to also move slightly outside of that when we see fit. Alongside me, Edmund, one of our senior designers here. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Ed, so I'm one of the senior designers here. I've probably been with the studio now about 3.5 kind of years, and I guess predominantly working within sort of branding and kind of obviously move around in various other spaces as well. And yeah, today I guess we get to talk you through what we did for the Kettle Kids, which is a really kind of great project, and I was one of the designers that worked on that.
Yeah, so as we kind of briefly mentioned, we take it through not only the project's journey, but a little bit of our studio's journey, discussing the importance of really understanding clients before we get going into a project, and how important it is to ensure that we're taking our clients on a collaborative journey through these projects. So getting to know our clients isn't just about strategy, it's also about understanding what they really want and who they're trying to connect with through the work that we do. So what we're going to be doing today is taking you through 5 key stages of our process. There are 5 key stages that we tend to go through. The first stage we call define, which is looking at research, questioning the brief, understanding the challenge, getting to know our partners and our clients as well as we possibly can, and then planning out kind of our narrative and territories. We're going to be talking then about the design process, so showing something that we haven't really shown before, but it's going to be part and parcel of our new upcoming website. Chris, we're going to plug it, if that's all right with you. It happens in the next few weeks, so we need to plug it as hard as we can. So yeah, our new identity and website is hopefully going to launch in the early parts of June. We're going to be talking about kind of the conceptual stage, how we kind of use initial concepts as being a real opportunity to express play and explore as much as possible. We're going to be talking through how clients and their feedback tends to shape how we ultimately get towards the end outcomes and the sheer amount of work that we have to do in that development stage. And we're also going to be talking about how that ended up bringing it to life, the supply chains that we have to work through, the external kind of partners that we collaborate with to bring sense of depth to all of the touch points that we have to work through, including spatial development. But where we're going to start is talk a little bit about who the client is. They will shoot us for the fact that we're using these photographs of them, but they're not on here, so we don't mind.
We'll be fine.
But yeah, just to give a little bit of background, the Kettle Kids are a watch brand that started in 2017, much like a lot of young aspiring entrepreneurs. They built their platform by Instagram and ended up building a huge audience for secondary market luxury watches. They started from a singular watch that was donated, that was given to them or handed them by their grandmother, and they went through this journey of continually trading up and up and up to now where they, I believe it's somewhere in the region of selling 4,000 watches every single year. So the challenge for us was taking 2 guys who built a business out of a very small office, which was basically 2 chairs back to back in a room that was the size of like a phone booth, to try and harbor and build all of, or kind of encapsulate all of that energy they had to take this onto a global scale, because their clients were on that scale, but the space in which they operated within felt still very, very kind of small and quite basic, and helping to vision or envision their brand on a much larger scale and build their first flagship retail space, which is now open in central London. So this is the 2 guys. This is not the branding we did, just so you know. This was on the first day that they acquired the site. They are very young. They're actually not that young, but just for me, they're young. Between they're 2 brothers, 26 and 28. They took a punt on this store in Maddox Street, which is just near, I don't know if any of you know, but just off Regent Street, opposite a space, a big kind of store called Liberty. They took this space with aspirations to build a very kind of, I suppose, a flagship experiential space that people could come and explore and interact and feel and see all of these incredible timepieces and jewelry. So with that in mind, we're going to just take you into how we started our process. And before we start the specifics of the design, which Ed's going to take you through, because he's far better at talking about that. We kind of start off our process by running workshops. And I think a lot of the time it feels like quite a familiar process. We want to try to understand and set up the correct foundations for projects to succeed by really understanding our clients. This was one of the projects where we weren't directly contacted to run like a thorough strategy exercise, but it's still really important for us to be building kind of conceptual narratives that ground any of the kind of design language that we produce. And that's something that you're going to see straight after I stop talking. But yeah, so in that workshop, we kind of really start to understand and shape out what their goals and aspirations are. We also try to ensure that we're pressure testing a little bit of their kind of internal alignment, especially with these 2 brothers. We want to ensure that both of them have kind of clear objectives that are shared. And if they're not, how do we get to a point of cohesion between the 2 of them? And then I suppose the big question is trying to understand the reasons why they believe now is the right time to invest in themselves and their brand, and what we can do as a studio to try and help achieve the goals and aspirations they have. So now we're going to get on to nice looking stuff. So I'll keep quiet for a little while, and then we'll go.
Yeah, and I guess this is kind of jumping into it very quickly, but I guess essentially, as James is saying, and I think there was a nice little moment at the end of that statement where we were looking about who they were, was this idea of like defining their brand and what is their brand to them. And I think they are kind of fresh and they're kind of a new brand or company and a new entity. And I guess what our job was is like, how do you create something that feels like we can kind of inbuild in them some sort of heritage or distinction within them as a brand and as I guess 2 people as a personality. And really where with this project, but we don't have a huge strategic piece, we actually want to lead into this concept that we use within our design process called visual territories, which is really a fact-finding exercise to go, okay, what is your design sensibilities? Where do you position yourselves? What brands do you like? What kind of tonalities do you like? And this kind of overall kind of helps us build out a landscape for them to move in and also get their involvement. I think, whilst depending on the scale of the project, I think, people want to talk about and be involved in that process and feel like they are participating. And so really what we did with this process, we based on our kind of thinking and looking into them as 2 people, like, as we're saying, that these 2 brothers from South London, what do they have that is their unique selling point as a brand? What they do is they hold other brands' watches, they sell them to people on a kind of a secondary market. They're not kind of creating their own product per se. So we kind of looked into their history and who they are as 2 guys, and actually kind of leaning into this almost this like Cockney, South London, very British world. Also, how do we kind of take cues and qualities of that and like push it forward? So as we've got on the screen, these are basically the 3 different choices we had. So the first one was this concept. So no, that's fine. So we had this concept of found gems, which lent into this thinking around kind of Cockneys and how they used to embellish clothing they had, and it created this sense of kind of, I guess, luxury, taking something that may be not expensive, making it feel more luxurious, expensive. These were very much to reminisce and kind of mimic the idea of royalty. we thought that was really interesting, something that was close to their hearts. Like, how do we take that, translate it into maybe a visual language that can be brought into a contemporary space, just so they can feel tangibly how they see that translate, rather than being too historic with the references. And then we built out a mood board and a kind of spatial concept very lightly, just to go, okay, within this space, do you feel this resonates with you as a brand? And then that's where we went into the next one, which was craft precision. You know, they're selling high-end, crafted, meticulously engineered product. Do we want to create an identity that reflects that? Do they want to come clean, very polished, and feel very, I guess, technical with that? And then where we kind of landed with the third one was this idea of modern legacy, which lent into them and their history, and you know, growing up in an area in South London where they had pie and mash shops. There's a lot of bespoke logo type and lettering. It's all very ornate and kind of artisanal, but very deeply entrenched in kind of the Britishness within London. We then took that, looked at how that mood board reflected in maybe a more contemporary space. So we can kind of play on those two worlds. Really what we want to do is look backwards, so something that feels historic and is kind of a legacy for them, but also got this modern interpretation, so they feel that they can balance these two worlds, rather than just being kind of hyper new, or looking very pastiche, somewhere in between. So then we get into the design phase, and I think we're going to like nosedive off straight into a lot of visuals. So, I mean, kind of where we start with that process is ultimately is the research. And that kind of helps define some of the spaces we want to move in, as we had in the visual territories, where it's about, okay, historic reference, contemporary visuals. This is about going back once we've chosen that route and going, okay, what is it about modern legacy that we want to kind of pull out? And I think a lot of that was the historic references within jewelry, so hallmarks or kind of stamps or kind of gilded, pressed into metal, whether it be logo types, whether it be kind of type structures, whether it be symbology. You know, what is within that vernacular can we bring out and actually push forward into this kind of new space? So that kind of formed the process.
And this is when we went crazy.
Yeah, this is where, and this is, yeah, really a deep dive into what our initial concepts may look like. And, you know, I think, you know, within what we're going to show today is these are extracts from our actual presentations that we actually presented to them. And, you know, we've removed a lot of the structure in the flow of these presentations and isolated a lot of design work, but ultimately, what we're doing in here is going, okay, here's some references, here's some things we can start to play on and push forward with that. And where does that feel and sit with you? So, you know, this example on the screen is from the things we just saw before. We actually took out and kind of started to bespokely draw and customize and create these letters. I think one point to add is the biggest part of the project was creating the identity, which is kind of, I guess, boiled down to the logo type, potentially a monogram or a mark, a type system, and then ultimately how that kind of conveys across the packaging and the system.
As well as how that cohesive, I suppose, conceptual narrative then forms all of our decisions within the physical space, because that was also a big part of this process, is to ensure that any kind of aesthetic from a typographic and an identity perspective could also live quite comfortably within the actual retail space, which we'll show you far later.
Yeah, and there's a lot of variety in here, which might feel very abstract in this context, but what we wanted to start to do, and I think with them and this space, it's brand focused. You know, if you think about a brand like Rolex, which is kind of well known, established, what you'll know about it is, one, its crown, its mark, two, its logo type, and maybe the color, the raw kind of green. You might not be aware of any other visual devices it does other than that. So the focus of this project meant that we need to put a lot more energy into those elements, so that in a distinguishable moment, they can go, okay, well, that mark or monogram moment feels like them. And these are just some examples of the things we explored. So whether it be the logo type feeling kind of ornate, bespoke, you know, this kind of an evolution of a Times Roman-esque aesthetic, then moving into these kind of more weird and wonderful moments of typography we saw in some of the kind of old references, then going to this concept of, okay, what about like stamps, marks, things that felt like an impressionable moment within that. So they have this quite diverse and rich language where they can be, you know, a logo type, or they can have a nice mark that they can stamp on things. And we just want to explore what they felt within that kind of made sense to them.
I think the other side is trying to make a mark on a relatively old industry is a bit of a challenge. They're stepping into prime central London retail space, and there was a sense that what they wanted to ensure is that anything that we were creating felt as though it had some sense of heritage, albeit being relatively new. The brand was established in 2017, as we kind of mentioned earlier, but it didn't really become something kind of, I suppose, solid until they moved into this retail space, which I think was acquired at the early parts of 2022. So you can probably tell then of the journey this took to build out a retail space, which we'll take you into later.
And yeah, within a lot of these visuals, and we're casting on wide net. I think really we see that the process is this, almost in a cliched sense, like molding clay, and how you get down to what could be the kind of the vase in the middle. And we wanted to create quite a big spectrum of opportunities where it's like, logo types, is it marks, is it monograms, is it these kind of ornateness, is it stamps, and just seeing texturally where all these sat, and actually how did they kind of resonate with that? Because I think one thing they wanted was it to feel there was a lot of touch points and moments that expressed different personalities and tonalities. And just very simply, in this graphic system, we didn't want to go too far and create abstractness that had no context. It needs to be something that, if it was being used, it represents or spoke to them in some way, whether it be their initials, their name, their location of where they are, and kind of, I guess, a bit like these kind of hallmarks we've started to introduce, is sort of postcodes, stuff like that, little like teasers into going, okay, well, this is a bit of their kind of DNA running through the identity.
So without that, hopefully everyone's following so far. I know the visual, it's probably quite a lot to go on the screen at that point. I think that the next kind of parts of this talk are going to focus more on the realities of a client. I think it's quite easy for us to present just the beautiful images at the end, but there are a lot of obstacles you have to overcome when you're working with these commercial clients. I can't see all of the attendants, so I'm presuming they haven't joined, but if they are, hi and sorry. But the kind of the way in which we navigate through our developed stage after producing these kind of really exciting, slightly boundless initial concepts that aren't really specifically focusing on a certain set deliverable, they're more to kind of build a mood or a tone or an understanding of the concept. There are a lot of things that you have to do when you're considering from the concept through to how we actually make these work as a logical system. And I think this is something that we're probably going to talk through now. Is there were some considerations that possibly in the early stages that we hadn't necessarily identified, which was, who are the stores they're going to be positioned against? Who are their reference points that they really like and aspire to be? We had bypassed the idea that they really wanted some kind of mark that felt as though, again, leaning into that legacy, something that they felt they could kind of hold on to, but rather than just creating something that felt quite nostalgic or dare I say it, kind of old-fashioned, we wanted to find new ways of them being able to express that, so we didn't just feel as though a mark was just applied onto everything, contrary to how they did their launch, which we did not control. But the mark was supposed to be used in a slightly restrained manner. So yeah, back over to Ed. We're going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of how we started to dial in and start to think through how we created more distinction and refinement within what we're working through.
Yeah, and I think with that, it's starting to kind of figure out who the characters are within the set of tools that we're starting to build for them. And I think, in this just very quick snapshot, it's like, we kind of now are landing on a position, okay, we want this masthead logo type. And, they were originally called the Kettle Kids, and we kind of boiled it down to just do Kettle Kids and try to create this kind of simplification.
We wanted to remove kids.
Yeah, just Kettle.
We don't always have the choice to be able to rename our clients. Just for those who don't know what kettle is, it is Cockney rhyming slang for a watch. And as they started off, albeit you'd probably say some of the way in which they kind of interact in their space, they can kind of hold and own the word kids. But I think that so Kettle Kids comes from the kind of Cockney rhyming slang for a watch, and we tried to move them away from the term kids, but because of the size of their audience, and it is significant, it was something that we only managed to get the removed, which we saw as a small victory, but yeah, we couldn't get rid of the kids.
Yeah, and then from that, starting to build up what are these layers, and mastheads, we wanted this distinct moment that felt like them, this all-encompassing banner moment, then trying to segregate down into different touch points. We really love like having these very simple typographic moments where they can be very subtle, very kind of simple, and just allude to either where it's location or who they are. Then we really started to explore this idea of the hallmarks. So whether these things be found in which like watches, where they have all their kind of makers marks, equally alluding to like London British signage, really nice kind of moment where it just kind of creates a distinction where, not in every touch point it has to be the logo on it, even though that's kind of sometimes the way it's used. It's like, how do you create layers that at different moments it feels like a textual experience? And that's kind of where we start to take it. But ultimately, starting with the logo type, that was something that we spent a long time crafting and refining. I think, maybe one thing to add is, traditionally the way we work is, we like to try and create as much bespokeness as possible, but sometimes, that's just not always possible. And it might be taking existing logo types, adjusting them, adapting them, working with a founder or the designer to find tweaks or moments of distinction. With this project, actually, I think it just became a natural kind of blend in that we just actually wanted to create this completely from scratch, and actually felt that we were going to create kind of ownership through that moment. And I think probably from initial concepts-ish, we then just actually started working physically into this. So, and that was a lot of iterations and versions. And this is kind of where we started to feel with it, is it had a strength and kind of rigidity to it. But actually what we wanted is really create this extremeness within the kind of the points and the sharps kind of play into that kind of, I guess, chain links and dials, and it can be very technical.
Well, this was very much the starting point of the typographic exploration. There was a lot of feedback throughout this, and actually what was interesting from the early stages, where it was quite difficult for them to be able to articulate themselves about their design sensibilities and giving kind of very specific feedback on the nuances in kind of like design detail. It was almost got to a point where they were so explicit around specific typographic detail. I think we ended up going through 6 or 7 rounds of the typographic development. So, which
I think is also a nice point, is that no matter the client, and them as a client was a very different interaction and experience from maybe someone else we'd worked with, but they were equally as meticulous and interested in the design process as anyone else we've worked with. And I think what is nice is when we can feel like we're working together, rather than it being feedback presented, is actually them being able to sort of feed in and, I guess, input into that process. And then, as we kind of naturally will do, is once we land with something that feels like it's starting to make sense, it's actually starting to explore it through the breadth of the places we can start to imagine it. And I think really through the touch points we had, which was ultimately developing an identity, how do you then put it across kind of stationary and kind of notional assets to then build them an experience? Because really with their brand, they're creating this store, which is, I guess, an experience. They looked at it more of a gallery or an exhibition space that is for people to come and experience them, get a sense of their personality, but then also within the buying process or purchasing, you actually get a load of little kind of things that you can start to unravel, unopen, and move through, that kind of just express kind of tonality and quality of what they do and who they are. And I guess really with the identity, we kind of landed with this logo type. We've got these hallmarks, and is actually trying to think about how do we explore the possibilities of what those things are. How does that form language kind of exist and move forward? And it can be as simple as, okay, well, we created a hallmark shape. Can we use that as signage? Can we use that as a window display? And I think, it doesn't have to be overly complex. It's just how do you really elevate and push certain qualities? And I think we wanted them to feel like they really unearth the sense of quality and kind of moments throughout their brand.
And I think this was the exact moment where they said, oh, we need a mark.
Yeah, I think it's missing this one thing.
that was an interesting choice.
Yeah, and I think it was. And I think, where, and it's not always a natural jump. I think, the history of the studio, there was a lot of work, prior to when I joined the studio, of kind of attention to marks, kind of monograms. And I think as a design kind of industry, we've kind of moved kind of slowly from that. And actually, I think that was something for them they really wanted to move back to, is how do we start to create something that felt very distinct and ownable as a separate entity without logo type or anything else. And it was a challenge. I think you can start to see within some of these examples here, and this is kind of where we start to get to as resolution, is that there was a lot of exploration and challenge. There was a lot of ways that we can imagine this and start to think about this as a mark. And I think, marks can either be a shape that's familiar, or it could be a shape that represents their brand. It can be, it can be letters. There was so many different places for us to explore. And I think even when we kind of look at kind of some of the places we started, there was just such a variety of things we wanted to investigate. And I think in the design process, there is something to be said that some things can be processed and structured, ordered. There's a methodology to how you work with something. Sometimes it is just about trial and error, and really, I guess, exploring what are the potentials within this. And I think one thing we knew is well, the kettle kids, they're going to use this K letter, this K form. It's quite a tricky letter. We didn't know how it was best going to start to work itself. We want to kind of capture this sense of what they do, jewelry, kind of precision, the watch mechanics, and then this kind of third factor, which is their last name, Hudson.
Yeah, so the kind of the logo mark itself, which you may not notice at first kind of instance, also these gifts, I know they're really quick to kind of look through. So if anyone does want to see anything specifically at the end, just let us know. But it's a kind of it's three different kind of things in one. It has like an overarching H form, which is the surname of the two brothers. They had a really nice brand story about their connection into their grandparents, something that for me I really resonated with. And I think the idea that there was two kind of interlocking Ks already, obviously from their brand name. But the other thing that was really kind of interesting to us is the fact that they'd started to manufacture their own jewelry. So we also wanted to create a mark that could actually be made into the chain link, so they could actually make into bespoke jewelry. So it was really important that that was able to be made into a hinge system. So you may have seen it on the previous slide. Apologies if we clicked past it too quickly. I think we come back to it. We may come back to it. Yeah. Maybe we'll post it on our Instagram.
Yeah, and I think, kind of jumping off, there was kind of, that kind of body of work at the start we'll just flick through was kind of one part of that design phase, and then we get like a second round of feedback and amends, and we were then closely kind of going back to this logo type. I think, they sat with it, they ruminated, they felt it was too sharp, they felt it was maybe too weighty. I think we then wanted to start to explore what kind of a delicateness within that could be, and how it can feel slightly more inclusive rather than be too heavy, feeling overly masculine. And through that process, we ended up trialing, I guess, a variety of different options and exploring that. But really, it was a kind of a carving process of how do we take that and just make it feel a lot more elegant. But what we wanted to do was contrast that with a few different options. So once we knew we were getting really close to what we thought was this final kind of mastered edition, is then to go, okay, well, was there anything else we didn't see or we didn't think we thought that could actually enhance or kind of better that, or they might like a different option, was going over that. And I think, it was a really nice process to keep kind of refining and actually landing something really beautiful. So, and I guess, this kind of.
We didn't design all of those.
No. This is not our portfolio. And I guess, this is kind of a good summary of, sometimes within branding, really people are trying to position themselves somewhere new. And I think with them, they were seen as maybe more a youthful kind of social media-esque brand. They still do that and they're still into that. They don't want to be perceived as those people per se. They want to be seen as someone that is closely linked to like a Prada or a Rolex with Dior, and be in of that world, but with a new kind of modern take on it, really. And then these are kind of as we started to refine these elements. So we've gone through this process of creating these different iterations. Now we're kind of focused in, and I think when we start to bring it into these contexts, we're starting to see this idea of, well, actually, this really feels like it's something that could hold its own and stand true against these other ones. And then I think in very simplistically here, we were just kind of exploring no break or break between the forms. Because I think one thing we've got to really think about is, where's this live? It's going to be sometimes maybe at a good large scale, sometimes it's going to be a micro, small scale. How do we want that to feel, and whether that bleeds into each other or not?
Small scale is small.
Yeah.
Like on the photography that we showed at the end, it kind of it feels quite significant, but actually one of the smallest places is on these kind of what do you call them? No, when you call the tag that goes on something to say that it's a real authenticity tag. So you have to consider how that works. The other side of it here was, as we mentioned, about the idea of the chain links not being joined would have actually been problematic. So there's two kind of versions in it. One that is able to be used in some of the animations we'll show you later, but also from a kind of physical manufacturer perspective, kind of the join format is used, or is to be used within the bespoke jewelry that they're going to be producing.
Yeah, and the overall kind of format shape of all these things, we want to make sure it's consistent. So that's why, for example, like the hallmark has this kind of point and shape on either side where the Ks are, which is the same thing as we've kind of in these visuals that we've refined is, how sharp do you want things to be? And then once we've found where we wanted that to be, is actually how do you make that feel consistent through all these different like touch points and assets? And then I guess where we start to get to is now we've kind of, okay, we've got the logo type we really like, and we've landed somewhere really great. We've got the hallmark, which is now feels resolved, and they're really kind of passionate about is this process of application and production, which, you know, in itself can create so many different verticals and kind of complications.
Yeah. It's not as straightforward as it seems at the end point. We've just got this beautiful packaging. A lot of the time, especially when working with independents, they don't actually know what the correct formats for their packaging are. And there's a number of considerations for a brand like this. One, obviously, is the amount of crime now in London, especially with watch thefts and everything like that. The consideration of having something out of packaging that feels quite, I suppose, in your face and obvious, so that people didn't know necessarily what you were carrying. The other side, obviously, is the fact that they're selling other brands. So we had to try and create kind of concepts that allowed Kettle Kids as a brand to sit first, but also still be able to not remove from the unboxing process that you'd get from buying a very expensive timepiece. So for production and how kind of well-versed and connected we are with our kind of production partners has been a really important part of the development of the studio. We pay a very, very close eye onto the structural, the format, and also our understanding of kind of technical possibilities, the costs involved, the timings involved, where we can get these things produced has been kind of quite an intrinsic part of our process.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just in this visual, I think it's quite interesting is, you know, iteration. I think, you know, throughout this process, there is a lot of time to explore multiple things. I think, you know, something that is always good to mind is like trusting the process, whilst it might feel that you have to expand really far, you're ultimately doing it to contract and have something really beautiful at the end. And I think, you know, something that they were really passionate about is maybe something you touch on is color. You know, each brand maybe has a distinction quality, like Hermes is, you know, an orange, or Rolex has got this green. And I think they wanted to go, okay, what is their kind of brand color or tonality? And the two spaces we start to move in was this like kind of really dark, rich brown, and then this kind of light, kind of minty, I guess it's sort of a blue, green, and teal almost. To contrast this kind of sense of, I guess, one being more like richer, and then the other one being kind of a lighter, almost like jewelry, like, you know, the term ice within jewelry is like, yeah, it's funny to say, but I think they actually really love that connotation and actually putting quite a light, beautiful, almost slightly in some lights it could look white, but it's not.
Well, I think the bit that we kind of bypassed, because ahead of actually getting to this final stage, obviously the store was underway. And as you start to spec out kind of the materials and finishes that you want in a store, it's not always as straightforward as being able to select a paper stock and then try to find exactly the same material that you're going to use with the perspex within the window. So there's quite a lot of work that goes into ensuring the design decisions from form, from materiality, from even construction and complexity. All of these things have to be considered in line with the kind of the progression of the retail space. We haven't kind of overwhelmed this presentation by putting loads of people in hard hats in a retail space. That's not our thing, but we've got a few of them. Thankfully, Ed removed some of the stupid ones of me. But it is hugely important for us to ensure that, and the clients also put a significant amount of trust in us from early stages to ensure that the narratives that we're starting from and the partners that we select to work with us across a multitude of different output points fundamentally and completely understand kind of that goal and that narrative that we're working towards, so that they know that any design decisions they're making wholly relate back to that kind of starting point. So it just does continuously feels like a comprehensive and a consistent visual language that goes through.
Yeah, it's a collaboration, and it feels very much like a relay race. Like, you know, we worked in collaboration with a brand who built the kind of the store and kind of the internal spec of that. And I think, you know, through what we found out through in the research phase and the kind of defining of this brand, they then kind of took that and helped lean into the concepts of how the materiality would work, the color system, and the way the space would look. And I think where we've kind of got to in some of these visuals that we're looking at now is reflecting how those things kind of inform that design language, and, you know, making sure we get the right tonality of paper to match the right shade of paint on the wall, or there's a stone they're using, so do we want to find a nice color to match the stone?
There's quite a lot of consideration when you move from physical print into retail, which is, does the color of the lighting internally affect what the color actually of your materials, so your your packaging actually looks under that light. So there is quite a lot of complexity that goes into almost what seems like quite simplified solutions of you choose a brown, therefore the brown has to go onto the external of the building. Well, we have to consider the fact that the light in the UK is a very, very different color temperature to, for example, the UAE. And so as we start to think through these design decisions, how, when they look to expand into other territories, how to ensure there's a consistency with kind of color feeling, is that regardless of what country or what kind of conditions you're looking at that, you always have that consistency. So where we ended up landing, again, I'm talking for you, maybe it's good that you want to just talk through this a little bit, but this is kind of like the consolidation of all of the design decisions that we made into formalized guidelines.
Yeah, I know maybe it feels like we've kind of jumped into the end, but I think really where we got to, as you can see, is with the initial process, it's this kind of like expansive, we found things, and then we held on to these few assets that we loved. They then became the central part of the identity. We then did see them explored in kind of the handover with the internal stuff. And then really, whilst that was being built, we then formalized it into the guidelines. And really this was to kind of showcase and hold all the design decisions and the things we did. So whether it be the typography that we chose as their kind of brand system, the typesetting rules, the way that they actually create the typesetting kind of information, and generally just kind of consolidating everything we came to. And I think, it's for them now to kind of create it on further. Now that was kind of various kind of applications that we created.
Yeah, so I kind of briefly touched upon the importance of partnerships. I spoke about it right at the beginning. We're very particular about who we collaborate with to do the parts of the equation that we just simply don't have either the capabilities or the know-how. I think what we try to do is always ensure that we do the bits that we're really, really good at and rely on other people to kind of like add value to the external parts that we want to ensure reach the levels of what we put on ourselves from the design process. So one of the big parts of this, we didn't do that window vinyl, so don't judge us. But this was very much as the store was being built. We worked quite closely with our spatial partner to ensure that they were very much taken on that journey of how we were beginning to construct and make design decisions through the brand identity. So this is a few kind of snaps of how we were kind of going through the process of testing out sizes. That one on the far right hand side, Ed with shorter hair, stuck up on this meeting room sliding door that goes behind us to ensure that the kind of size testing, but probably quite familiar to when we were in a design school, of how we were quite loosely proofing things to ensure that we're creating a little bit of an understanding of how these would actually relate in the retail space.
Yeah, we had some very kind of simple assets that we had to create, and I think we need to make sure these things worked and physically kind of came to life. And I think in the image before, it was testing, even creating the scale and the samples just by printing it in the studio, stapling it together and creating little dummies of things. So then I think one of maybe the overlooked parts of these processes is the actual print part, and actually having to go, and like the image before, the videos before, is like sitting in a production in a printers. I think I spent 2 days sitting at a printers, just longer, maybe a week, sitting at a printers, and just they print it out, I check it and say no and start again. And I think it's funny because with the things that you do, and especially with an identity like this, we've kind of reduced it down to some very simple moments, is that they have to be very beautiful and they have to be very considered, and we can't allow for things to be done wrong. So and those visuals are kind of highlighting really that we'd get something printed out, check the corners, check the radiuses as the foil kind of worked. And I think there was actually a really kind of intensive process of like, actually for them, they wanted these kind of shop bags, and these bags had a kind of, I guess when we started, it was just the foiled logo type. They wanted to be really blind, so they didn't want people to see it really. And then as we started to do it, realized it wasn't that interesting to work as well. Actually, we kind of wanted to raise that, and it was actually a really complicated process. So that ended up taking quite a few.
We've got it on the screen as well.
It actually took quite a few iterations to get that, and I think we had to sit the printers and work out, is there too much heat on it? Is there too much pressure on it? And actually to kind of sculpt and carve that logo type out was quite a meticulous process. So I think that was, just really something interesting to do and experience. And actually, that manufacturing process is so integral to these things looking right. And then I guess feels like maybe a jump, but I think then from that onwards is once we've got these things realized, and then documenting it. So taking it once we've managed to get the printers to produce it in the way we see fit, is then this process of actually articulating it as a project. And yeah, it was quite, this again was quite much this process, but really fun, and actually seeing these things come to life. And I think, you know, there was 6 of us, I think, on set, or 5 of us, collaboratively working together to try and, how do we kind of best visualize and enhance and show this project as its final entity. And then, yeah, I guess in this kind of section, we're kind of thinking about, yeah, the actual delivery of this. So the kind of the final hallmark in this kind of beautiful animation that we meticulously spent time on.
Yeah, and we're kind of on the last pages, where the last thing we did in this process was, as Ed mentioned, kind of document all of the work that we'd done. We looked at all of the kind of the print processes, all of the printed collateral alongside the retail space. We wanted to include more retail images, but again, there's been so many images in this presentation. We hope that there's been enough that you can take from it. But yeah, it's been a wonderful process of taking 2 people who didn't really necessarily, well, they'd never been through a process like this before. It came at the end being far more, can I use the word anal? I'm using it anyway, far more anal but design intricacies than even some of us can be at times. So hopefully that was interesting, and that was exciting to see how we went from something that was relatively crazy into something that feels quite simplistic and refined. And hopefully you enjoyed us taking us through this process.